We were on a road trip one time, and we were brand new parents. And I mean like brand new, like the little guy's balled up in a ball in his seat behind us, you know. And I am terribly annoying on road trips because in the car, I'm the guy that flips the radio like 100 stations a minute. I'm that guy. And it drives my wife crazy. And I should also tell you, another annoying thing about me is that I am a kind of person that will listen to radio preachers. I love them. I don't know where I get that. I think it's my dad. But good ones, bad ones, I'm there. I'm listening. And this one particular day, I'm flipping through those stations, you know, and I catch the end of a sermon. And from what I can tell, it's real good. And I hear the preacher say this: as arrows in the hand of a mighty man, so are the children of one's youth. And I had never remembered hearing that scripture before in my entire life. I had to look it up. It's from Psalms 127, a psalm that's attributed to Solomon. And in that psalm, King Solomon makes this analogy between children and, of all things, arrows. So most people's last hands-on experience, I mean, if they even have any, with a bow and arrow was when they were about 5 or 6 years old in the backyard with their dad, right? And he, pulled over a little sapling with some kite string and off you went to play. Unless you're a bow hunter, it's kind of a kid's toy. Bows and arrows are not something we use every day now. Historically speaking, though, they're one of the most, it's like one of the greatest inventions of all time. It's been one of the very long, it's extremely ancient. It's been with us pretty much since the beginning. And just about everybody the world over used them, all sorts of different groups, Scythians and Parthians and Comanches and Mongols and the English. Most people don't realize it, but the bow and arrows, reign or its effectiveness actually lasted a whole lot longer than we really realize. Into the 19th century, it's not that long ago, it was the preeminent weapons system, the bow and arrow, the preeminent weapons system on the American plains. And only a Connecticut Yankee named Samuel Colt and his repeating pistol would finally turn the tide and drive the bow and arrow onto the pages of history. As modern folks, though, we don't know a lot about bows and arrows generally. But people of the Bible actually knew a whole lot about them. You'll remember that the code, between Jonathan and David was arrows. Remember this? So as Jonathan tries desperately to save his best friend in the whole world from, Jonathan's murderous, unhinged dad, King Saul, arrows was what they used to communicate. And David's son, King Solomon, he actually knew all about bows and arrows too, although that's really putting too fine a point on it because Solomon knew just about everything there was to know about every subject. The Bible actually says in 1 Kings 4 that God gave Solomon very great wisdom, which we all know about, right? We know about the wisdom part, but listen to this. He gave him discernment and breadth of understanding as vast as the sand on the seashore. So that Solomon's wisdom, this is one guy, Solomon's wisdom surpassed all the people of the wisdom of all the people of the East and all the wisdom of Egypt, a civilization, incidentally, that was already ancient in Solomon's time. Verse 31, he was wiser than anyone else. And it strikes me we should probably listen to somebody like that. And so this morning I want to kind of take Proverbs 1 and verse 6 to heart. And that verse says that we should try to understand a proverb and a figure, the words of the wise and their riddles. And so I think there's a lot of value in trying to do that. The 127th Psalm is generally described as a psalm about God's blessings in the home, okay? And Solomon has this amazing ability to say a whole lot in just a few words. So this thing's not long. I mean, you heard the scripture reading. It's 5 verses. It's not much there. So usually the marquee verse that everybody remembers here is verse 1, that unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labor in vain, which is a wonderful principle, in a bunch of different contexts. And that would apply, I guess, whether you're maybe building an actual house or you're starting a home, maybe even building a business. One would think that Solomon is thinking about the construction of the Lord's temple when he's writing this. Or maybe you're like Solomon was. He's a king, and so he was watching over a city. He was concerned about his community, about its protection. You're worried about your city's future, its security. Second half of verse 1 here. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the guards stand watch in vain. And you're just killing yourself. You're working so hard. Verse 2, in vain you rise early, and you stay up late, toiling for food to eat, for he grants sleep to those he loves. Some versions will say that you're eating the bread of anxious toil. And if you've ever eaten that bread, it's some nasty bread. The psalmist says that you're doing all that in vain if you're doing it without the Lord. Now, it's not necessarily, I don't think that the house under construction is never going to get built, or, it's not going to meet code, or it'll fall down. It's not that the home you're making necessarily will end in tragedy. It's going to disintegrate in loss. And it's not that the business will fail necessarily, and it's not that maybe the city you're watching over will be immediately overthrown if you're doing things without the Lord. But I think it is that in the long run, the significance of what you're doing is limited. And the permanence of what you're building, and what you watch over, that's what's in doubt. When things are done, whatever they may be, with the Lord's stamp of approval, with his imprimatur on it, that they're both permanent and they're significant. They have meaning. All right, none of that's my sermon. I want to focus today actually on the last half of this psalm. Solomon has just encouraged us, maybe even warned us, that if you want to build a house, a home, you do it with the Lord. And if you're concerned about the security of your city, you can work as hard as you want. You can get up at the crack of dawn. You can put on a pot of coffee at night, stay up all night. But the wise man says that the key to all your plans is reliance on the Lord. And we have a tough time as modern people, learning that lesson. But Solomon pivots away, though, from verse 1 and 2, and he'll introduce this new subject. Question for you. What do you fill a house with? What do you fill up your home with? Don't say IKEA, but you're kind of correct. What do you fill a city with? What are like the basic building blocks of society? Ancient, modern, doesn't matter. Well, the answer is it's people. And specifically in this context, in this text, it's little people. You fill up homes and houses and cities with kids. Children, verse 3, are a heritage from the Lord, offspring, a reward from him. And that word heritage means a possession, so like a property, an inheritance. It's very concrete. So ancient Near Eastern peoples did not do a lot of abstraction, okay? They liked a rock. It's a tower. It's a mighty fortress. It's a sword. It's a shield. It's an inheritance. Kids are an inheritance. They are something passed down to us from God himself. Solomon also calls our kids a reward from God. I mean, it is Mother's Day, right? I want to know how many people walked in here this morning and did not know that. Like 3 guys? Is it 10 guys? Y'all are so in trouble because somebody's going to find out. I'm just wondering who you are, Solomon says, though, that this word reward, in other texts, you'll see it translated as wages, so like a paycheck. Now, I'm not going to ask you how many of you have your kids make you feel quite that way, like you just got paid. And if they don't, that's okay. But Solomon says that the children to fill our homes and our communities up, that we're building with the Lord, remember, with his help. They are both our paycheck from the Lord and part of an inheritance that he gives to us all, passed down to us from his hand. Solomon, though, he uses this word picture in verse 4, and this was my radio preacher's text that day. As arrows in the hand of a mighty man, so are the children of one's youth. And he keys into the basic nature of arrows to get his point across. But why does Solomon use that particular analogy? It is a little weird. He's talking to moms and dads. He's talking to parents. And yet he's using this very warlike, martial analogy, this figure of speech. What is it about arrows in particular, or I guess arrows in the hand of a certain person, that Solomon wants us to know? So what I can riddle out so far is this. It's that people, like arrows, if you want them to be effective, they've got to be, number one, carefully built. And number two, they must be intentionally aimed. And kind of building on those two facts, there is a point, and we have to know there's a point at which it's too late to do either. It's too late to build. It's too late to aim. They are gone. Just like an arrow flies from a bowstring. People, kids especially, but all people, they'll leave our spheres of influence. At some point, they are gone, or else we are. The fact that people move, in and through and even out of our lives provides a lot of motivation, or I guess it should provide a lot of motivation for us to influence them and busy ourselves with the work of influencing them for the Lord right now, while we've still got that time. So I can tell you, I don't know if you've ever tried, but building arrows from scratch is hard. It's extremely difficult. So there's these little thickets, and I think there's some right outside. But all around the Woodlands and all around this area, there's these little thickets just full of this unlimited supply of Yopon holly shoots. Okay? And they're about as big as your little finger. And they make real good arrows. But the skill and the effort and the time that you can burn in making one of those little guys into a real arrow, it's just crazy. It's just staggering. The original arrows that you can see, there's actually a few of them left. We've got a few in museums here and there, not many, but there's a few you can go look at. They weren't kind of all business. They weren't just all engineering, for your engineers out there. They were sort of works of art. They were artistic too, right? And they'll be painted, they'll be beautiful. They're red and they're striped and they're black, and they have this weird alien-looking blue-green color. You guys remember bluing? Like that maybe your great-grandma would use on the laundry? They'll be fletched out with turkey feathers or even eagle feathers, very unusual looking, very pretty. They'll be pointed with stone. In and of itself, that's an art form right there. Or they'll even be tipped out with steel. Some people would cut steel out of old barrel hoops, if you'll believe that. But these people would go through this process of cutting and drying and straightening and attaching feathers and putting on a point and all this stuff. And they would do that not just a few times, but maybe several hundred times each over the course of their lives. The time that these people invested in their arrows was immense. It was just Herculean. It's crazy. Something we have a tough time understanding. And these countless near-perfect arrows did not happen by accident. I mean, it's silly to say, but it's kind of obvious, but they do not jump out of the woods ready to go. They did not happen by accident. And like carefully made arrows, godly young people don't just happen either. I guess broadly speaking, just about anybody can have a child, but not just anybody will be a mother, and not just anybody will be a father worthy of those titles, and not just anybody will bring kids up in the nurture and in the admonition of the Lord. Ephesians 6 and verse 4. Not just anybody will do that. That does not happen by chance. Godly kids are raised and trained and with an immense amount of care and frustration and planning and tears and you name it. Lots of sleepless nights, throwing a couple of trips to the ER and vomit. There's always some of that. Oh, like that's not true. Everybody's like, oh, I can't believe you said that. You know it's true. These people work for those roses today. Infuriatingly, though, as parents or otherwise, the results of our influence, it's real hard to see sometimes. You may not know how the kids turn out for years, maybe even decades. Maybe you still don't know, maybe well into adulthood. I'm not sure my parents know how I turned out yet. But speaking of influence, I've kind of neglected you guys without kids this morning. But everybody's in on this, not just parents. Me personally, I can, with the Lord's help, I can build my kids like the well-crafted arrows of this psalm. Like I can do that. And again, with the Lord's help, maybe in small ways I can do that for your kids too. I can help build them up. But you guys without maybe kids underfoot this morning, you can also intentionally build up young people in the Lord. Maybe even in ways that parents can't. So when I was growing up, there were kind of, I guess, peers or contemporaries around my parents, and when I didn't want to listen to them, for whatever reason, these people were around my parents, they dressed like my parents, they talked like my parents, they were the same age, they were exactly the same people, basically. And if I didn't want to listen to my parents, for some reason, I don't know why, I listened to these people. They had an influence on me. They could affect me and influence me for good in ways that my parents sometimes just couldn't. And I suspect you've had the same experience. It's not just a biological link that matters, it's the intent that matters. And being intentional in building kids, being purposeful in getting those little suckers to heaven, super hard work. Takes a lot of time. Takes a whole lot of time. It's easy not to be intentional. It's easier to coast. I mean, that's what everybody else does. I don't know where it's from, but you guys have heard the little line. I think it was a dumb punchline or something, but ready, fire, aim. I don't know where that came from, but that's what everybody else does. No one else does things purposefully. It's easy to coast. Incidentally, we're not just building these little kids to be better citizens, right, or to have really good jobs, and all that's nice. And we're not building these kids to physically tick all the boxes that the world thinks we need to tick to be successful. That's not our goal. That's not our aim. We're building them just like we're supposed to be building ourselves into effective spiritual weapons. Paul will tell us in Ephesians that our struggle is not against flesh and blood. It's not against this stuff. We're fighting spiritual battles in spiritual places. Maybe your kid gets into the Ivy League, and that is cool. Good for y'all. Maybe your kid makes it to the major leagues, and that's awesome too. But to add some perspective, as Christians, we were on a level way, way higher than that. We play in a league far, far above those. And we would do well, I think, to remember that. It's almost cruel, but if you think about it, the nature of arrows is to propel them as fast as they'll go away from you. Beautifully, painstakingly handmade. They have a purpose, but their purpose is not with the people usually that made them. Their purpose, their target can be a long ways off. So arrows are part of a group we call ranged weapons. And so ranged weapons are weapons that function beyond the reach of the user, okay? And so arrows go places the archer can't go, beyond his reach, all right? And so arrows do jobs that an archer can't get done otherwise. And arrows can't do their job at all, I guess until and unless they're let go. We said that making arrows is hard. Aiming them is very difficult as well. Super hard work. To me, one of the more, sobering parts of the Old Testament kind of begins in Deuteronomy, where Moses is restating the law to the people. And so it's interesting because he's not just concerned with rehearsing the rules themselves. He does that. And he'll start with the commands, but then Moses almost immediately will shift into and tell Israel how the law should be transmitted through the generations, right? How do you pass this on? They're to teach their children. And very early on, they knew that. That was not a surprise. Listen to this. This is from Deuteronomy 6, Moses speaking, verse 7. Impress them. So these laws, stamp them. You mash them into your kids. Stamp them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and on your foreheads. You write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. Down in verse 20, Moses will talk about what they are to say with when their kids would approach them and say, hey, Dad, why are we doing this stuff? And Moses addresses that. Here's what you say. Here's how you address that. He repeatedly reminds them, you talk about these things all the time. You talk about what the Lord's done, what he expects from you all day long. They were to integrate teaching their kids into every part of their life. And brothers and sisters, that is aiming. What's your plan? How are you going to get these little guys to heaven? How are you going to get that bunch of arrows where the Lord wants them to be? I think Moses would say that you start with teaching at every single opportunity you come to. It should consume us as parents. More on that later. All right, so I want to flip this image over, though, from arrows to the mighty man. Now, who is this person? Now, I don't know who you think of when you think of an elite warrior. Are you thinking about a Green Beret? You were thinking about a Navy SEAL. But whoever you think of, why are kids described as arrows or weapons in that person's hand? Best I can figure, I think Solomon is saying that the ideal person has the ideal tool at an ideal time. So you have this cutting-edge weapon system in the hands of the person most apt to use it proficiently, to use it well. The mighty man can change the course of the battle with those arrows at that moment, and it doesn't last long where we see him there, standing there, holding those arrows. But at that point, at that moment, those arrows are a world full, maybe even an eternity full of possibility, of opportunity. All options are open at that moment, and it doesn't last. It may be that you're a parent or you're somebody else that has, special influence on a child's life. And you may be the only one, or maybe only one of a very, very few people at that moment that can influence that particular kid for the Lord in the way he wants them to go. Which is, at one time, it's both encouraging and kind of terrifying. It's a lot of responsibility to act, and it's easier not to act. It's easier not to say anything, and it's easier to mind your own business. But if you do act, maybe you'll never even know the result. Maybe that only comes to light many, many years from now, after people have moved on or grown up or you're not around. But right now, you could be the ideal person with the ideal tool at an ideal time in that kid's life, in that person's life. We hardly ever think of it this way, but there is an expiration date on our influence. And that's true for the Aerosmith, it's true for the Archer, it's true for the Mighty Man, it's true for the parents, it's true for the non-parents, it's true for everybody. There is a particular day, and I think of it as a Tuesday. I don't know what your day is here, but on that Tuesday, there will be a time when my influence expires. And I can't influence anybody for good or bad anymore. It'll be too late. Don't blow it. Don't waste it before that Tuesday shows up. So maybe you don't feel up to the job, you're not feeling too mighty this morning. I got you. I understand. I read you. But I would ask you a question that I've asked myself, and this is from our text. Do you reckon that if you built your house with the Lord, and you're the kind of person that has entrusted the well-being of your city, the security of your city, into His care, do you think it follows that He would cut you loose when you parent? Houses, gotcha. Cities, no problem. Parenting, I can't help you. You're on your own. Come on. I don't buy that, and I don't think it follows from this text. A heavy responsibilities, it's sort of interesting. Some people will face this big responsibility, and they will crumple. It will crush them, and they will be discouraged. And then some people will actually bow up under it, and they get strong, and they pick it up. Solomon's not trying to crush us here. He's trying to encourage us. Pick this thing up. You built with the Lord. You can parent with the Lord too. I think about those people back in Deuteronomy, and they're interesting to think about because we know so much about how they went wrong. We know so much about, when they did this and they shouldn't have, or they should have done that and they didn't. We know so much about their failings. The people that sat there and listened to Moses giving the law, these instructions about who God was, what He expected of them. But arguably, I think their biggest failing of all, it's summarized early in the book of Judges, and in verse 10 of chapter 2, the Bible says this in Judges. After that whole generation, this is Joshua's generation, after they had been gathered to their ancestors, so everybody's dead and gone, another generation grew up that knew neither the Lord nor what He had done for Israel. Now that is a tragedy. I mean, the whole book of Judges is a tragedy, from end to end. I mean, it's bad. Whose fault was it? Whose fault was it? It's uncomfortable, but at some point, it was moms and dads. It was moms and dads that heard the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. They heard that, some of them from Moses' own lips, from Joshua's own lips. Do you think that those people consistently talked to their kids about the Lord at every possible moment, at every opportunity? They didn't. They didn't. They forgot. They were running their business. They were in their C-suite job. They were helping their friend out with that charity deal. They were shopping. They were on the golf course. They were streaming Netflix. They were on their phones, and they forgot. Ready, fire, aim. If we'll use it, one of the really great blessings about being who we are and knowing what we know and living when we do is that we can avoid these people's mistakes. We can avoid the tragedy of the book of Judges, because it is a tragedy, and it looms over every one of us. Who else will aim our kids if we forget? And I worry about who might. All right, so I don't want to leave you on a downer. Let's talk about verse 5, because I love verse 5. Blessed is the man with his quiver full of them, full of kids. So I don't know the exact count, but does anybody know, rough and tough, how many babies have been born in Woodland Oaks in like the last 2 or 3 months? It's crazy. It's like 12, and maybe more than that. Those parents will find out kind of like probably what I did, but those kids are going to drive them crazy at some point, because my kids drive me crazy. They drive me absolutely bananas. There was I don't know if this is true about you, but there was a time in my life when I was real even-tempered, and I didn't get mad and completely in control of all, of every situation at all. I knew all the answers. And then I had 3 kids. And I found out not one of those things was true about me in the first place, ever. But Solomon says, blessed is the man, and I'm not kidding here. Another translation of blessing, blessed is happy. Happy is the man with his quiver full of them. Just a ton of kids running all over him. Am I stressed out and irritated with my kids and their goofball antics? Yes, I am. I will be today. Am I colossally blessed to have them? Yes, I am. Yes, I am. They are my heritage from the Lord. They are my paycheck. They're my inheritance from Him. Passed down to me, not anybody else. Unless they're real bad, in which case they're my wife's. I'm blessed to have them, though. Happy most days, but blessed every day for sure. Those kids are going to go and do things I can never do. They're going to see stuff I can never see. They're going to go places I can't go. They're going to live lives that are so very different than ours. And Lord willing, they'll serve and glorify God in ways that we can't foresee and certainly can't accomplish ourselves. They are, in fact, ranged spiritual weapons. Solomon finishes up the psalm, and we'll finish up this lesson with a last tidbit, kind of the back half of verse 5. They will not be put to shame when they contend with their opponents in court. Interesting verse, translated a lot of different ways. Sometimes it's the parent doing the contending. Sometimes it's the kids. But either way, these people that fill this house that the Lord's built and this city that He watches over, Solomon says that when they contend with people in court, and it's literally the city gates. Remember, city gates were kind of this mashup of like city hall, seat of government, real estate market thing. Okay, when they contend there, they will be unashamed. And as they interact with people in their city, friendly or not, enemies or not, they won't be unprepared and they won't be outgunned. To me, there's some echoes of this whole thing in 1 Peter. If you look in chapter 2, this is picking up in verse 5, Peter speaking to Christians. He says this, like living stones, let yourselves be built into a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. For it stands in Scripture, and he quotes Isaiah here, see, I am laying in Zion a stone, a cornerstone chosen and precious. And whoever believes in him will not be put to shame. If we've been built by the proper builder and we put our trust in the cornerstone, obviously, alluding to Christ here, we won't be ashamed. We won't be vulnerable. We won't be unprepared. Our kids will see wonderful, amazing, terrible things. Things that none of us have ever dealt with. Things that they'll have to stay faithful in spite of, in the face of. And we can't tell them exactly how their world will look in the distant future. We just can't do that. But what we can do is to ground them in the principles and in the knowledge and in the wisdom found in the Bible. And what we can do is to equip them and build them up in the Lord. And what we can do is to point them, dare I say, aim them at Christ Jesus the Messiah. As it happens, trusting in an eternal God is kind of by definition future-proof. These kids in this city Solomon describes, in these homes built with the Lord, they're prepared. They won't be ashamed because they have been intentionally, properly built with a lot of painstaking care. They've been aimed well and purposefully. And at the release point, when it's too late for any more preparation or discipline or advice, we can have good reason to believe that they will fly straight as an arrow as they go on their way to glorify God, their Maker. The Lord has built the homes. The Lord has secured the city. And the Lord's made the people too. As arrows in the hand of a mighty man, so are the children of one's youth. While we stand and sing.